Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Civilian Medical Podcast. This is episode 63. We're going to be talking about building a kit on a budget. So I think this is a pretty cool idea. Sam, my co-host, came up with it. So my name is Dietrich. I am Skinny Medic on YouTube, and Prep Medic is my co-host.
And competitor.
Nah, you're not even competition to me. Like you put that little thing on Instagram about you're trying to catch me on Instagram, and I was like, go and follow him, and thousands of people left you.
Thousands.
By they were just swarming. I saw your channel crashing from here on the East Coast.
I believe it. Well, so this week we're talking about kits and building stuff up. Thankfully, we have a sponsor that actually fits pretty well into this. You want to tell them about it?
Definitely. So we appreciate Primary Arms for sponsoring our podcast. And I was looking around on their website, and they have some pretty cool bags. They are Primary Arms. The ones I was kind of looking at is their bags they have branded for them. And since we're talking about building a kit on a budget, I thought it was a pretty good fit because you could spend a little bit of money on some nylon that is probably going to hold up fairly well. Being honest, it's just going to be riding around your vehicle, riding around your office, things like that. So if you're looking on a budget, there's no sense going and spending $200 on a pack when you don't have to. Especially if you're on a budget, like we were just talking about before the show. Like if you're using your equipment every single day, then yeah, spend some money on it. But if you're a weekend hobbyist or you're on a budget, money's tight, which I completely understand, then don't go spend a huge amount of money on nylon. Like just get what's good enough for the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And this video is almost entirely self-serving because I am sick and tired of getting all the comments whenever I post a piece of gear that's like, that is so expensive. What kind of person do you think I am? I can't afford this stuff. I just go to the range. And frankly, I agree with a lot of those comments. For the everyday person, times are hard right now. And a lot of times people are having to pick between, that piece of gear and putting food on their table, and they pick putting food on their table, hopefully. So this week, I really just want to go through like the beginning all the way to the end of, kind of the budget items you should buy, what you should buy in order, classes and things like that. So that's really my goal with this, is just to give people budget options that are evidence-based, that are going to work. It's not cheaping out on something. It's just really analyzing what kind of injuries you're going to see and going from there.
Definitely. So your YouTube channel this week, you posted which gear was it that you did? It was your belt, right?
Yeah, it's my belt I use for SWAT medic operations, and it's like pretty much everything on it except for like a high-speed gear taco pouch and a Blue Force gear pouch is Crow Medical. And for like an empty fanny pack, that's the kit, and the bleeder pouch, I think it's like $200 to $300. So it's expensive. And then you add the tourniquet pouch and the high-speed gear pouch on, you're looking at at least $3. So very pricey.
But you're doing a whole series about your tier 1, tier 2, and 3 setups, correct?
Correct. Yep, I'm going through everything.
So if you're interested in listening, watching that series, go over to Prep Medic's YouTube channel, and he's got a pretty cool series going right now. I just posted a video on my Maxpedition backpack, or laptop bag, so super high speed tactical stuff. But I normally am posting. I have one coming up after action video that I'm pretty excited about. So guy drops a piece of glass and cuts his arm off. So
I think I saw that video. Oh, that's brutal, man.
That is brutal. I was like, I got sent that thing like 1,000 times on my DM. So I was like, all right, cool. We'll do that one for an after action. But we also started posting these on our YouTube channel as well. So if you're listening to the podcast, go hit the subscribe button. We were talking about like my first goal for that Civilian Medical Podcast YouTube channel is to get it to 1,000 subscribers. So that's our goal.
Absolutely. I don't want to after action it for you at all, but I think it goes into it. A lot of people, whenever I post something about like bleeding kits or carrying a tourniquet or a piece of quick clot, they're like, well, man, the United States must be a horrible place, they say, because there's guns everywhere and you're prepared for shootings everywhere you go. And I think a video like that really highlights the importance of, having training, having supplies on you, because it's not like we focus on tactical things because we're both tactical paramedics, and that's, kind of our professional background. But that's not where you're going to see a lot of this. It's chainsaw accidents, it's dropping a piece of glass, it's a car accident, motorcycle wreck, you name it. And that's really where a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, I think, comes in.
Definitely. Like, I was excited when I saw that video because I was like, it's in a garage, it's construction workers. That is absolutely, like, people don't get shot typically just walking down the road. Like, you're just minding their own business and get capped in the head, like Mr. Guns and Gears. Have you seen that one? Like
I've
Mr. Guns.
seen that. That's crazy.
So that is not normal. That typically does not happen. So I think this is a good idea, cool episode. So let's talk about being on a budget. But first, I want to review the March algorithm. When we first started this podcast, we did a whole episodes on each particular subject, like massive bleeding, airway, respiratory. So if you haven't listened to those, go back from the very beginning, the early days of our podcast, and re-listen to that. But I just want to go over, especially when you're talking about building a kit, like there are things we need to prioritize on spending our money, and then certain things that aren't as important as other items. So covering the March algorithm.
Yeah, absolutely. So the March algorithm is just a really easy way to prioritize what you're going to treat on somebody coming up to them. And it's usually what you're prioritizing if you're in an austere environment of some kind. That could be you've got traffic around you that's zooming past. You got to get people out. You've got, an active shooter going on, something that makes the scene unsafe. And it can even be used very effectively in scenes that are safe. It's just predominantly historically been used in like combat situations. I believe the DoD came up with it. So starting with M, we have massive hemorrhage. So why is that so important, Skinny Medic?
So we got to keep the red stuff on the inside. That's important. Typically, most of us aren't carrying packed red blood cells, frozen platelets around on us all the time. So keeping all the red stuff on the inside is important. That carries oxygen for us, which the brain really likes, the heart really likes it. So we got to keep all the red stuff on the inside. So having some way to stop bleeding on the arms and legs is important. Junctional areas like arms, armpits, groin is another area too. So to be able to put a tourniquet on and control major bleeding in the axillary parts is the main priority.
Yeah,
you can bleed out in 3 minutes from a femoral artery. You're unconscious in a minute and a half. You're not able to, those fine motor skills are leaving you. So you got to be able to stop the stuff really quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people comment, they're like, well, I don't like carrying medical on me. And that's fine. Like you can carry stuff however you want to carry stuff. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. But a lot of people are like, well, I keep something in my car all the time. And that's good enough for me. And well, that might be good enough in some situations. Like I'm sitting at home right now. My car is parked in the garage, connected to this house. And I would be hard pressed right now if somebody had an arterial bleed next to me to run to my car, get my tourniquet, and run back here and get it applied within that 3-minute time period. So just consider how far away your interventions are. And the reason we really want that massive hemorrhage to start is, or that why that comes before everything else, is because we can't, like you said, put red cells back in somebody. We don't carry blood transfusion equipment on us. So the faster we get that to stop, the more survivability there is really for these patients. Even a liter of blood is a pretty big deal. So we want to stop that as soon as possible. And then we can start addressing some of the other issues as we come down the line. In a tactical environment, massive hemorrhage is really the only thing you're going to address in your, like, what would be called a hot zone. Obviously, your priority first before you do that is getting somebody out of danger. So if you're in traffic, grab them by the collar of the shirt and drag them to the side of the road behind a car, something that's going to give you some protection. Then start the massive hemorrhage, and then maybe look at making it even safer. In a shooting environment, it's, if somebody goes down, you can throw them a tourniquet, see if they can do some self-aid there. But your priority is going to be neutralizing the threat or getting out of the threat area. And then you can look at applying it. But that's really the only thing that's done in that, quote, hot zone.
Definitely. You got to do the Scene Safe BSI dance.
Scene Safe BSI dance.
Yeah.
Yeah, total tangent. Did you know that National Registry is going away from the psychomotor exam?
I did. I saw that.
So that's going to be a thing only old timers know, is the BSI Scene Safe.
Yeah. So I'm still going to do the Scene Safe BSI dance. So yes. Yep. I saw that. yeah, like you said, you got to make the scene safe. Like no medical happens while there's still a threat, and that could be a car accident, that could be an active shooter, anything could be a threat. It's like if you get hurt, you can't help anybody else. So then once we have massive bleeding taken care of, airway needs to be our next thing we're concerned about, and this is unconscious, snoring, not able to maintain their airway. They've got blood, puke, teeth, whatever in there. We got to be able to clean it out. So a couple of things we can think about for the airway.
Yeah, absolutely. So, an airway shouldn't be confused with breathing. Like this is just we're just trying to have a clear path from the mouth and nose to the lungs, so that if there is a drive to breathe, they're able to do it. And then if we provide those respirations, it can get from point A to point B. The easiest way to really ensure this is just patient positioning. I like, if I'm not going to be able to stay with somebody, I like turning them on their sides. That's just going to keep it so if they did vomit, they're not going to aspirate it. They're not going to gurgle their own saliva for a long period of time. It keeps the tongue kind of forward on the mouth. You can kind of support their head with their arm over it. So getting that positioning down, if you have time and you can stay with this patient, it's not an active shooter scene where you're, actively hunting a threat or something like that. In that case, you can do either a head tilt chin lift if you're not concerned about like a potential neck injury, or a jaw thrust maneuver, which are both, I mean, they're not advanced procedures, but something that you should, take some training on. For those of you watching on YouTube, the head tilt chin lift is while they're laying down, you just take their head and you grip under their chin and their forehead, and you just lift their head up. And then the jaw thrust is getting your fingers right behind the mandible and pushing it forward. So you're getting their bottom jaw to jut forward. And what both of these do is it gets the tongue off the back of the throat, it stops occluding it, and will just allow that clear air passage for that patient.
Definitely. So those are obviously the very basic steps. And we want to start there first before we go super crazy. But then you could look at an MPA, like depending on your skill level, your comfort level, your level of training, things like that. An MPA works. I like an MPA because it doesn't hit the gag reflex. Like we don't have to worry about.
What does MPA stand for?
Nasopharyngeal airway.
Good. That was a test you passed.
Yeah, I kind of slurred it a little bit, but it was smart. Don't ask me to spell it.
Yeah, and like you said, training's key with those, right? Like you can have them, but if you don't know how to use them, they're useless. I don't personally prescribe to the whole, well, I'm going to keep something advanced in my kit that I can't use just in case somebody can. That's not how I think through that. So yeah, absolutely. Nasopharyngeal airway is important and can definitely open that as well.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we're talking about in this episode, is the budget thing. Like if you're on a budget, I would not spend money on something that I may or may not need, or even have the education or training to use, because that's money that may not get used. Like the pre-lubed MPAs are $5 or $6, and even like the packets, things like that, like they're $5 easy. So I wouldn't buy that just thinking that prep medic or skinny medic may show up on the scene and not have an MPA with them to use. So once we have their airway protected or cleaned out or whatever we need to do, the pass clear, then we can move on to respiratory. And like you said, this is the act of breathing, whether they're not breathing at all, or they're breathing too fast or kind of slow. But we can fix that problem. And we can also fix holes in the box. Like we put chest seals neck to nuts is what I say. It's close enough. And, but we can either seal the box or we can fix the box.
Yeah. So with that, obviously the, hopefully when you get to the airway portion of it, you position them and they still have a drive to breathe and they're breathing on their own. You just had to position their body to a point where they could actually facilitate that. More unfortunate is if they've lost that drive to breathe, could be from a head injury, drug overdose, gunshot in an unfortunate location, something like that. And that's when we have to breathe for them. To each their own. Everybody has to kind of gauge the risk of this, base, bare bones, no equipment. You can do rescue breaths for somebody. You can do mouth to mouth. Today's day and age, especially, there's a large risk of infection or some kind of transmissible bug between you. So, for me personally, if it's a family member, yeah, I wouldn't think twice about it. If it's some random dude on the street, I might try to go a different route with that, or have some piece of equipment that I could actually rescue breathe for him. But I'm probably not doing mouth to mouth because for me, it's too big of a risk. for you. So yeah, basic, you don't need anything, but I'd recommend having at least like a little barrier device. They have these face shields, not very expensive. And we'll talk about this, I think, a little later in the podcast, but you can do it and it covers their mouth and it has a one-way valve that goes into their mouth so they can't get like spit and saliva on you. Still not the epitome of safe. There's still a risk, but it's far less than, actually French kissing somebody on the sidewalk that you've never met before.
Gross. You have to take me to dinner first. Um, so then C is circulation. And I kind of do a twist about this because typically, like in a TC class or something like that, we're talking about checking pulses, blood pressure. This is where we would give red blood cells. Like we kind of start an IV, start doing some little small things. But for the civilian side, I kind of say, all right, this is where we're going to check a pulse if we want to do that kind of thing. But this is where we do a secondary exam because this is where you miss the first gunshot wound. Like you find the obvious one, but you miss the second one that's up under the armpit or that's in the butt cheeks or somewhere weird that's in a crevice that you miss. So I teach under that C is to go back and let's do a secondary exam just to make sure we have not missed anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody that doesn't work in EMS or hasn't seen these patients like might think that's ridiculous. You might look at it and be like, "Oh, there's no way I would miss a big hole on a patient." I have absolutely missed big holes on patients. When you get really stressed out, when there's a lot of blood anywhere, you focus in on one thing and you completely forget it. So this is your chance to kind of step back and, like you said, really look for the secondary injuries, the other things that might be happening. Periodically you'll put pressure on something, you'll stop bleeding somewhere, and then you'll actually increase pressure and they'll start bleeding from other places. So really having that secondary assessment and redoing your bleeding control is super big here.
Perfect. And then H is divided up into either head injuries or hypothermia, to kind of depending on what you're thinking about. So we talked about hypothermia in our last episode. So if you missed that one, go back and just listen to the whole thing, and that'll fix that. But really, head injuries we can't really do anything about. Uh, I usually talk here about disarming our patients because this is where you find like the old man who's got the dagger, he's got the little like Smith and Wesson 357 nickel plated revolver, and he's not completely with it, like he's altered, and then he wants to fight you. So this is where I talk about just protecting them, protecting yourself, protecting the patient, and then keeping them warm.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding those other things. Sorry, having mic issues here. Really looking for those things. Asking somebody. If somebody's altered, they're not thinking clearly. Even we have a policy of disarming cops if they're at all altered whatsoever. If they're just a little bit confused, we'll have another officer take their firearm. We'll have them take their taser, knives, just because you don't want that patient. You resuscitate them, you help them, you stop that bleeding, and they start getting some of their faculties back, and they're in their confused state. They might see you as a threat. So getting people disarmed is super important. And it's also a very risky thing because, it's kind of a reaction if you've gone through any kind of self-defense class, or you have that mindset. Somebody's trying to disarm you. That's like the worst thing ever. So make sure you're communicating well, make sure you know how to handle a firearm before you try to do anything like that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like we have the same policy. We do try to get an officer to do it because that way they're probably more likely to recognize that particular officer. But same time, that's why we go to training twice a month with the range with our guys because we know how to work the firearms, know how to work their pistols, we know how to work their umps, like we know how to work everything that we know how to completely make them safe. So that's kind of what we do as well. But our first goal is to get an officer to do it. But if we can't, then we're going to do it, make it safe. So I do not want to fight. Those guys are like doing jujitsu on Wednesdays just for fun. So no, I'm good.
I'm incredibly jealous that your team has umps.
Yes, they're like the old magazines from like the 1980s. So they're kind of like don't drop the magazines is the only rule. Like we can drop our Glock mags, no big deal, but do not drop an ump. Magazines are like those things are so old. But yeah, those things are fun to shoot.
Do they even fire if you don't have a black ski mask on?
I'll let you know next month.
Cool. Try it out. Next video.
Next video. And then I did March in our notes here, but a lot of people throw E on the end of March. And this is basically says two things. Is one is everything else, which covers evacuation, which I'm good with. But basically, anything else you want to do at this point, you're welcome to do it if you have free time, as long as it doesn't delay definitive getting to trauma center. But if you want to evac them out, you want to put a band-aid on, you want to give fentanyl, ketamine, whatever you want to do, everything else is covered here. So, but also I talk about evac, like moving them closer to care, moving them, things like that. So, but that's kind of what you need to think about when you're building a trauma kit.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on to E a little bit, as a civilian, if you're, on the scene of something, getting somebody to a trauma center is king. So figuring out how to get them closer to the ambulance that's responding or to the hospital, whatever it might be, like that takes priority. But let's say you're in a position where you just can't move somebody. You got a 250-pound dude in a basement. There's no way you're getting them up the stairs. That's fine. Look for ways to optimize egress. So, is the door unlocked for first responders coming in? Are things cleared out of the way? Does dispatch know where you are? All of those things that you can really facilitate that movement. If you have a way to move the patient, you've got like a mega mover or something, throw it under the patient and just get it ready to go so that they can get there and get things move into the hospital. So that's the biggest thing, is just try to be busy, try to do things. There's going to come a point where you might be kind of looking at your hands going, I don't really know what else to do, and that's fine. But really staying busy is important.
Definitely. I did a video on that probably a few weeks ago now. It was after action video. It was an officer is at a mall, and like he picks this kid up and like throws him over his shoulder and like jogs out to the front pad. I'm like, first
Great.
of all, that guy's cardio is awesome. And I said in my video that if you can move these people, yes, you're going to make the cops grumpy because you're moving the crime scene, but you are 100% helping this patient get closer to trauma center, because the time the crew gets the ambulance out, they throw the cardiac monitor on, they throw the first in bag on, they forgot the oxygen cylinder, so they run around the other side of the ambulance and get it and throw it on. They put their 95 mask on, put their gloves on. It's forever before they get inside on this gunshot wound. So if you can get them closer to care, then you're absolutely saving lives.
Great. So are we going to move on to talking about some of the supplies that we can do to affect this?
Yes, like we were talking about it. The first thing that you talked about, like if you had a little bit of money to spend, you would not get any gear.
No, gear is great and it's important, but honestly, I would start with knowledge. I'd start with training, and you can get a lot of training for not very much money. Most states, most regions have somebody that'll teach you CPR, at least hands-only CPR. It doesn't have to be healthcare provider level, for free. A lot of fire departments will set up a little like community service thing and teach people how to do CPR on a Saturday at a school. Really easy to gain that knowledge. You can even watch videos online. I always recommend doing, hands-on stuff, but if all you have is an online video, great. Watch it, get proficient, and then stop the bleed classes are the other one, where a lot of people will offer stop the bleed classes for free or for very little money. So, really looking around for those, contacting first responder agencies. I'd imagine you could probably even find an EMS agency and somebody in it that you could come in and be like, hey, can you tell me about a couple things? Like, what am I supposed to do here? And they can educate you on that. So that's where I would spend my time and effort. If I was really looking for a budget, I'd start there.
Definitely. And like just to put a shameless plug on our YouTube channels, I think that's a great free way to get some easy training. Both of our channels are kind of directed at different people, but the same people at the same time. So, like you just did a video on infant CPR, which the comment section was hilarious because I was reading people saying like, "Oh, you can't just irresponsible. You can't learn CPR by watching a video, and they got to have hands on for learn infant CPR." And I would disagree with that. Like I think watching you teach infant CPR will absolutely may save a life, probably will save a life in that lifetime of that video. So if a parent watches that video and at least has seen it, they're like, I think I can do that. So that video absolutely will probably save a life in its lifetime. So a YouTube channel like ours is important. Now, there are plenty of YouTube channels out there who are teaching garbage, who don't teach very well. So I would think about your instructors as far as that, what you're watching. But I think our YouTube channels are great, easy, cheap, free education for you.
Yeah, and you can get pretty much any degree you want online. So just knowing how to vet your sources, knowing that, a professional resume doesn't necessarily mean somebody's teaching the right things, mine included. So vet your instructors, make sure that, you're doing your research. But Yeah, you can get a lot of that knowledge for free or for very cheap, for sure. So I personally think Stop the Bleed and CPR are the two like really high yield courses you can take. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like that's something that you're going to see a lot of. You could be at a restaurant and see someone choking. You could be at a family get together, church, whatever, and someone goes into cardiac arrest or starts having chest pain or has a stroke. Like those AHA classes all talk about chest pain. They talk about strokes. So you can make a big difference there. And then we talked about, to stop the bleed. Like everyone wants to train towards the active shooter, the gunshot wound, but typically it's going to be someone cuts their leg with an axe, a chainsaw, a knife. Like it's something stupid that happens, and it's not a 9 millimeter Glock that takes them out. It's something weird, like a piece of glass.
Yep.
So I think those two classes are perfect. If you want to go more, like go look at getting your cert. Most counties have a cert class that's volunteer group of people that provide great education there. If you want to go further than that, go to your local fire department. A lot of fire departments have volunteers, so you can get some free classes there. So it can basically start with CPR, stop the bleed, and go as far as you want to take it. In South Carolina, you can get your paramedic for free now, so it can literally go as much as you want to go now and get education.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for those, I know I get questions a lot on my channel of like, hey, what am I allowed to do? Um, Really, anytime you do medical care, there's a risk of litigation, and that's what scares a lot of people off. However, if you're having these basic skills like stop the bleed or CPR, you're pretty much exclusively covered by Good Samaritan laws in the United States. So basically, what that means is that if you're acting in good faith and you're not getting paid to like specifically to render aid to somebody, you can't be sued for it. They look at it and they go, hey, even if you did everything wrong, even if you did chest compressions on their butt and delivered your rescue breaths the same way, it's okay because you tried and you really did your best. And it's really to encourage people to help. So for the most part, you're protected. Now, if you go out there and you start doing surgical airways on somebody, or somebody hires you, like you go to like a rugby game and they're like, hey, you got some first aid. Here's, $50 for your trouble. You've bridged into professional, and that's when you're kind of hanging yourself out to dry, as far as Good Samaritan laws go, and you could get litigated for that. So use your head, but for most of these skills, any skill you're taught in CPR or stop the bleed, you can do, to somebody and not fear any kind of reprisal.
Definitely. I would back that up 100%. Every single state has some sort of Good Samaritan law. It may be named something different in your state. You can do some research on that. But for the most part, you're covered. And like Sam said, you could put a tourniquet on and you're covered. You could blow smoke up the rear end and like, oh, I was taught that on YouTube. They're fine. But if you go to start an IV on someone, you stick a needle in someone's chest or you stick a pin in their neck because you saw a MacGyver, like that's going to be a problem. So what do you think about? So we covered M for massive bleeding. On a budget, what are some things or some items you think about for controlling major bleeding?
I mean, first and foremost, you're wearing clothes right now. Hopefully, I mean, maybe you're watching this naked. I don't know, but you're wearing clothes right now that you can pack a wound with. You can take any T-shirt and pack it into a wound for a junctional site, and most shirts are going to be a very dense fiber material. So you can go in there, you can provide that pressure at junctional sites. You can even pack wounds on lower extremities, anywhere on the arm where you'd normally apply a tourniquet, and it's going to be pretty effective if you can really get it in that wound, put it up next to the artery, and just keep on packing it. So if you have the knowledge of wound packing, that's going to work great for you. Is it the like most ideal thing in the world? No, it's not. But pressure is king. You don't need anything fancy. So if you can't afford anything, that's why that knowledge is so important, because you can provide chest compressions and you can take the shirt off your back, pack it into a wound, and save a life that way. So that would be like the budget option for stop the bleed. Now, what's one step up from that for you?
So I think about compressed gauze would be my next step up above that because you can buy compressed gauze. You can buy the fancy Z Fold compressed gauze for $5-6. Compressed gauze is like $3. So you know, no hemostatic agent, just cheesecloth basically, or cling things like that, rolled cling, is my first go-to for someone who's on a budget. If you got a little extra dollar or two, get the Z fold because I think it does fold a little bit easier, especially when you're trying to wound pack. But if you don't, then roll gauze is super cheap. It unrolls and you can wound pack it and hold pressure. You're gonna have to hold pressure just a little bit longer than you would if you're using combat gauze or C-locks, but it works. It absolutely works.
Yeah, and the thing with combat gauze and Cellex gauze is that while they're demonstrated to stop bleeding a little bit faster, there's yet to be demonstrated increased survival, mortality, and morbidity of patients. So there probably is one. If they really get some studies done, you'll probably have a little bit of a better chance of survival with those things. But pressure is king. That's the thing that's really making a difference for patients. So don't feel like you have to go out and spend $50 on a thing of gauze that's going to expire in 5 years. Like, you can go buy that, $3 to $7 thing of rolled gauze and carry that around. And they're really small too, smaller than most wallets. And that's kind of what I've gone with because I've been getting lazy with my EDC, and I'll just throw one of those in my back pocket and run with it. And then I know I have something for a lot of different situations.
Yeah, I mean, even H&H makes some good gauze, like some little mini tack gauze. Like it's super small. It's about the size like their mini gauze is probably the size of this notepad right here. So super small. But like you said, if you a t-shirt, towel, whatever, something clean-ish, because they're gonna get antibiotics at the hospital. So something that you can put pressure on and stop the bleeding is important. So, what are your thoughts on like a tourniquet? Because we know that arms and legs are compressible. We can probably get the bleeding to stop, but it would be easier if we had some sort of tourniquet. And
Yeah.
a belt's not your first choice.
No, a belt is not even a choice, if you ask me. T-shirt's gonna work so much better than a belt. I can't tell you the number of people I have rolled up on scene with, and they're like, "I got a tourniquet in place," and they've got a belt. That's just making the matter a whole lot worse. So the first thing I do is I take off the belt, piss them off, and then put something real on. So never a belt. All right, never. For tourniquets, really, you're not going to get away with cheap for tourniquets, in my opinion. If you want to go with something that is truly evidence based, that has a lot of combat applications, real world applications, you have to go with something like the CAT, the Soft T Wide, the SAM XT, and all of them are going to be in the same basic grouping of price around $20 and $40, I think, is the range they usually run. So you're going to spend some money. The thing about tourniquets is that their advantage is quick application. So we want to stop that bleed as soon as possible. I can apply a tourniquet way faster than I can pack a wound. It's just more efficient to do that. You can do an improvised tourniquet. A lot of improvised tourniquets don't work. I think 100% of them failed at the Boston bombing, and a tourniquet that doesn't work is actually worse than not applying one at all because you stop venous return to the heart, but you still have arterial flow down the limb. So you lose blood without anything returning, which is why I say packing gauze first, tourniquet second. But I wouldn't just carry a tourniquet because honestly, its use is very limited. It's just extremity bleeding. When you have junctional sites that a tourniquet won't work on, you have multiple extremities, a tourniquet's not going to do that for both of them. So you can buy a tourniquet, but just know you're going to spend a little bit more money, and you should still have some kind of compressed gauze with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think I read an article, I don't remember where it was from now, but it said that basically improvised tourniquets have a 50-50 shot of working. And you're absolutely right. The article I read said the Boston City Marathon, like they were improvised tourniquet, but none of them were actual improvised tourniquets. They were all pressure bandages. So I think, yes, I would rather see someone use a t-shirt or gauze to hold pressure on an arm or a leg instead of trying to improvise a tourniquet. Like I think you can have a better outcome by just doing that. I think if someone was dead set on a tourniquet that didn't want to spend $30, on a cat or soft T, I would probably point towards the SWAT T. I know we may disagree with that a little bit, but I think it's not one-handed application. It sucks at that. But I think if you're looking for something that could cover as a pressure bandage and as a tourniquet, I think the SWAT T is like $15-$16. I think that's probably where I would recommend someone.
Yeah.
But knowing that they're going to go up to the CAT or soft T or SAM XT or something like that. So I think if they were just like, I want a tourniquet, I would point them towards the SWAT T. That's everybody's got an opinion, I guess. So
yeah, I agree with that. Because that's kind of always been my go-to as a backup. If I'm looking for a really slimline kit, I'll have one of those, like the Live the Creed kits have them in them, and I like them fine. I like that they're very wide. You can apply them to somebody else really well. K9T recommends them. So I'm not against them at all. The thing you have to understand though is like you have to buy two. I would never say somebody go out and buy one because they're not just an intuitive application device. And once you open it, that one's pretty much shot for real use. So you have to buy two, which ends up, well, you have to buy two with other tourniquets really for training as well. But
That's another episode.
that's another episode. But with this, I think the SWAT T is a slimline option that's a little bit cheaper. I do think they raised their prices to like $18 a thing though now. So a little bit more
Yeah,
pricey, but still worth it.
I was super grumpy about that. Like I sent them an email about that because I was like, "You're creeping up on a cat." Like, and I was honest. Like I sent them an email and I was like, "You're creeping up on the price of a cat." And like, if I'm going to tell someone to spend $18 plus shipping, I'm going to recommend the cat soft T all day long over your tourniquet. The reason I recommend your tourniquet before because it was $10, $12 now, just creeping up in price for a rubber band. The other thing that I would think about if I were on a budget would be the T3 Israeli bandage because it is like it's a 4-inch ace wrap basically, and it comes with wound packing gauze in there, and they're
Oh,
pretty
that's a good
cheap.
point.
They're pretty cheap. They're not probably $10, something like that. I was gonna pull it up real quick, see if I can do it on the fly. Yeah, T3 bandage is $12 at medicalgearoutfitters.com, and you get compressed gauze in there and things like that. Even the Elias pressure bandage, like I was just like brainstorming. The Elias is $11, so you could get the Elias comes with wound packing, compressed gauze, or rolled gauze, not really compressed. It has a piece of plastic in there you can make a chest seal out of. Has a pressure bandage. You could, in theory, make a tourniquet out of a pressure bandage. It's not ideal situation, but you could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. Something that I've never really carried, but they do have a lot of uses in one little thing. So really looking for something that does multiple things well, I think is a key when you're looking for the budget. So moving on to Airway, what do you think about that? Or what would be the next thing you'd purchase in a kit?
So, like you said before, like Airway, we can put someone in the recovery position and hold their airway open. Or I can do a head tilt, chin lift, a jaw thrust, and I can open their airway and I can maintain it. Like I could get a bystander to say, "Hey, I need you to hold their jaw just like I'm holding right here. I need you to hold their head just like I'm holding right here." Um, if I were thinking about like purchasing equipment, I would either like the little like blue booger sucker for kids, like we used to do.
Mhm.
Um, or even like turkey baster, like I've done that's really weird, but I've recommended turkey baster before because it's basically the NAR tactical suction is a turkey baster. It's just a really fancy one but somewhere for me to clear the airway is important. I think about because I don't want to stick my finger in someone's airway, and if they do have blood, vomit, I want to make sure I can clear it. So the little blue booger sucker upper is like $3 or $4, and it's compact. Or I don't know how much a turkey baster is at Walmart, but I think it's some way to clear the airways. I'm not so much worried about buying an MPA or an OPA set, things like that. I think I can do that on my own, but I don't want to like suction and clear on my own.
Yeah, and I think an OPA set is really a waste of money at this point for anybody. Even if you have a big budget, I don't use them in my practice. I don't use them professionally. I don't use them, for my home kits or anything. Anything you can do with an OPA, in my opinion, you can do with an NPA, and you don't risk triggering a gag reflex and causing vomiting. So, NPA maybe not. I personally like if I'm carrying a kit or something, I'm not going to get like a turkey baster or a booger sucker or anything. I think those will work. I just assume put them on their side. If you're not afraid of getting a finger bit off, just doing a finger sweep in their mouth and getting some vomit out. But you can definitely get the turkey baster open the end a little bit more so it can get more of those large chunks up there and just be able to clear that airway of vomit and then understand how to position a patient so that they're not going to be choking on their tongue is fine. Like you said, though, the MPAs aren't that expensive. That's not going to help you with like vomitus. All that's going to do is basically bypass the tongue. So just understanding what your tools are for and what they'll accomplish is important.
I switched out to the pre-lubed MPAs because that way I don't have to tape the packet to my MPA kit. They're like 50, 60 cents more. So I think for $5 you could get a pre-lubed MPA and just throw that in your kit. And a 28 will generally fit most adults. Um, kind of get into a little, like if you have kids or things like that, but a 28 will fit most people. So I would buy, just if you were going to buy something, I say a 28 pre-looped MPA will get you by most situations.
Yep, and that's what I have in all my kits. Is just 28 MPAs for all my TAC-Med stuff because that fits every adult on our team.
And then, so that's Airway. What about Respiratory?
Yeah, respiratory, and it's something. So I need to read the studies a little bit more. But when you're talking about like respiratory and how to breathe for somebody, um, I'm going towards chest shields, but I want to actually back up a second. Look at like some kind of barrier device. You have the barrier devices that you can put over somebody's mouth and nose and it just protects you a little bit. You have the really basic ones, which are just a plastic sheet with a hole in them. And all that does is to keep your lips from touching their lips. But then you can have the ones that have a one-way valve on them that keep them from vomiting in your mouth. Here's a spoiler, guys, is that when somebody dies, all the sphincters in their body relax, including the one going down into their stomach. And oftentimes you will have vomit coming up, especially when CPR is started. So having something like that is important. Now in CPR, if I was just doing it as a bystander, I'd do compression only. I don't do breaths. I don't waste my time with that. Compressions are king. They're what's going to make a difference for patients. But if you have like an opiate overdose where they still have a heartbeat, need to breathe for them, that's when the mouth to mouth is going to come in. So having that barrier device, I would love to have a like face shield, and that's what you'll get in a lot of AHA CPR classes. They'll give you one. It's like an actual mask, and there's a hole on it and a one-way valve, so it gives you separation from their face, and then it gives you a one-way valve. So if they do vomit, it's not going to come up, and that's probably like the safest way a bystander is going to do it. And then if you're a professional, of course, you're going to a bag valve mask, but that's a skill that you have to hone, and it's not something that anybody can pick up and do effectively.
Definitely. I think, for thinking about a budget, I think the CPR shield is what I would recommend. Uh, if you had a little, like the shield is like $5 maybe, you could go to a mask that does a little bit better still for like $10. So if super budget, I go for the plastic shield. If I had a little bit more money, I'd go to a factual face mask. I agree with that. And then what about a chest seal?
Yeah, so that's what I was alluding to there is I need to look at some of the data, but chest seals, I think, have gone down in importance when it comes to like sucking chest wounds and stuff. So the concept is that if you have a hole in your chest wall to your lungs that is larger than your trachea, it's a larger opening. Physics will dictate that when your diaphragm levels out, it's going to draw in through that hole instead of through the trachea, and it's going to be oxygenating areas outside the lung. So obviously, it's that oxygen's not going to get to your body. So the thought is that you put a chest seal on there, and then it forces the body to draw air through the trachea into the lungs instead of into that thoracic cavity. I was reading something the other day that was saying like, oh, actually they're going away from chest seal use in a lot of situations for patients. I personally still use them, and I still will apply them to a patient with a sucking chest wound. But I don't think at this point in time, if I was on a budget, I'd go with chest seals. I don't think they're the most necessary thing ever. You can do a sandwich bag with duct tape if you really wanted to over their chest. A gloved hand, if that's the only issue they have, taking like a gloved or an ungloved hand and putting it over their chest, over that wound, is going to occlude that hole, and you're going to solve a lot of issues there. So a chest seal is great when they have multiple injuries and you just need to address something and move on. If you are breathing for somebody, that's important. But yeah, not the be all end all of medical supplies, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree. I mean, the time you buy like the hyphen chest seals, halo chest seals, like those are fairly expensive stuff. So a gloved hand would work fantastic. Like when I went through paramedic school with Moses, we were doing petroleum gauze. Like we were taping petroleum gauze on, and I was like, "Oh, sweet! Like this thing's super easy." And then the first patient I got, I was like, "This sucks because you can't get the tape to stick." So yes, petroleum gauze does make a chest seal. A plastic bag makes a chest seal, but a gloved hand would absolutely do the exact same thing. So I would probably just tell people to skip out on the hyphen chest seals or something, or the halo chest seals, just gloved. If you want to put something in there, pick up some petroleum gauze. 5x9 petroleum gauze would work. But no, you're going to have to hold pressure on it. So you're going to basically do the same thing like you were talking about. You're going to hold pressure with a glove. You're just putting a piece of gauze in there to kind of help with the barrier. But anything that doesn't allow air to cross through it can make a chest seal.
Yeah. And if I say the word tension pneumothorax and you don't know what it is, you shouldn't have chest seals in your kit, because that's an issue that you can apply a chest seal and now you can actually cause a tension pneumothorax, which is going to kill them a hell of a lot faster than that sucking chest wound. So, that's why that education is so important. So don't just have something, know when to use it, like understand what potential complications it can cause. And that's one of them.
Definitely. All right. Anything else under respiratory? I can't think of anything else.
No, that's the biggest stuff for me, honestly, and just price comparisons there. I think like the hyphen chest seals, which is what I use, costs like $11 for the twin packs, and then Halo's a little bit cheaper, but I think there's only one. And then like the face shields and stuff are going to be less than $5 most of the time, in my experience.
Yep. So circulation, not really a whole lot we can do there. Like I said, that's kind of what we talked about. Was just making sure you haven't missed anything. So then, for head injury and heat loss, what can we do on a budget there?
I mean, so number one is get him somewhere warm. If you have no money for it, just move him somewhere, turn on the heater in your car and drag him into a seat and start driving to the hospital. Make your car as hot as it can get. If you want like budget things, you can get like really cheap wool moving blankets. Are going to do wonders for you. Wool is antimicrobial. It insulates when wet. We talked about this a little bit in the last podcast we did, but that's going to be one of the cheaper options. And just having one of those in your car or, know where one is, it will do a lot. Or you can buy those cheap Mylar blankets that you can get in a kit. Those aren't very expensive. They're like $10.
Yep.
And you just have to make sure you're insulating with them. You can't do those solo.
Yep. I agree. Like I said, if worst case scenario, if I don't have any money, I'm gonna throw somebody in a car. I've done that. Like I've put patients in the back of a patrol car while I was waiting on an ambulance to get there. Just so hey dude, turn your heat wide open for me. The Mylar blankets are super cheap. The hot packs, like we covered this last 2 weeks ago in our podcast. So definitely nothing we can do for head injuries there. We're not gonna like use our DeWalt drill and drill bit in their head. So I think that's it. Like if I were on a budget, I would put this stuff in a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag, and that's why I would roll with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to spend money on nylon. Nylon's expensive. Like we were talking about, I actually have it right here. What we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, like a kit like this, empty kit is like $300. You don't need nylon. The everyday Joe doesn't need a quick deploy kit or something that's like that's going to withstand deserts and, movements in and out of helicopters and crap like that. You just need a plastic bag and a backpack to throw it in. And it's easy to access. It protects it good enough. Like you want to take that one step up, get a double sealed freezer bag or something, or vacuum seal it. Just make sure you have tabs in it. Like there are really cheap options for storage you can do that are not going to break the bank.
Yep. So we mentioned duct tape. We did kind of throw that in there at some point. We didn't mention tampons though. Thank gosh.
The only thing tampons are going to do for you is they're going to make you a hero to your wife, daughter, girlfriend. Having one of those for them at that time of the month, they'll thank you forever. But we're not packing wounds with tampons. And I hope everybody listening to this podcast understands that by now. If you don't, leave a comment down below and get roasted.
That's funny. So I have a story about a tampon. I'll tell it real quick and then we'll be gone. But so I'm standing there, we're doing a detail. I'm in full tactical gear. Like I am super tactical, looking strong. And this lady comes up to me. It's like, do you have a tampon? And I was like I got pissed. Like I was like, what? Excuse me? And like I thought she was messing with me. Like I thought one of the cops had sent her over there to mess with me. I'm like, excuse me? Like, no, I have a trauma kit. Like I don't have a tampon. And she's like, no, like my daughter just started and I just didn't know if you by chance had one. I was like, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. Yes, let me get you a tampon. And we got her one taken care of. But I was like, I thought one of the cops was messing with me, like, because I just did a video on my YouTube channel talking about tampons and all like how not to use them. And literally was the next week, this lady's messing with me on a call. So I thought the dudes were messing with me, but no, she really didn't need a tampon because of her daughter. So yeah, we have all of the supplies we talked about. Like if you're on a budget, you can go to medicalgearoutfitters.com. You can use coupon code Civilian Medical, which will save you 10%. So that knocks off a little bit more money there. But most of the stuff we talked about is together at medicalgearoutfitters.com. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. This is a cool idea. I think hopefully this helps people on a budget. And then I think we're going to work on an episode where we have your budget. Like we just have unlimited funds and we're ready to go.
That'll be fun. That's my kind of med kit.
Yes, I'm excited about that one too. So I thought this one was cool. This is definitely helpful, but I'm also excited. I love spending other people's money. So I'll spend your money. We'll make a kit that if funds were not an option, we could just buy whatever we wanted to. We'll buy it. So interesting how much that kit cost. So this kit here, we're probably, what do you think? We're under $40, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, you're easily under $40 if you buy everything we talked about. If you only buy, if you go with a T-shirt and you spend some money on education, you're 99 cents free.
Yeah, and like I said, you did a video on talking about just gauze. So I think for cheap $5, you could get started with a trauma kit. $40, we're on a budget and we're rolling. So get some training. I think there's a guy on YouTube that says the right gear and the right training. So seems to be a pretty catchy theme there.
Whatever.
Perfect. See you guys in 2 weeks.